Social tolerance and capuchin nut cracking. As noted in section 8.3, wild capuchin monkeys have been observed to use stones to crack open nuts. The nut is placed on a hard substrate, the anvil, and a hammer, stone, is lifted high and then pushed onto the nut. DeRosina et al., 2008, report that proper effective nut cracking is not achieved until around 3 years of age, yet earlier in development, juveniles attend to nut cracking by members of their group. These observations have led researchers to propose that certain behaviors might help to create an optimal situation for social learning of tool use. First, young capuchins are drawn to the nut-cracking behavior of others, likely because of the small pieces of food that become available to scrounge. The association of the tool use activity of others and the presence of food would likely encourage continued attention to the location. Second, the nut-cracking individual must tolerate the presence of a scrounging juvenile. Young capuchins attend to nut-cracking not just by their mothers, but also by adult males and other juveniles. A certain degree of social tolerance is necessary, then, to allow for young members of the group to engage in social learning of tool use, a proposal that has been generalized to other tool-using species. That said, some researchers have also argued that an opportunity for innovation occurs when at least some of the individuals of a group are foraging alone or are less tolerated by others. Thus, a tool-using species like the tufted capuchins might represent a balance between social toleration for scrounging, proximity of naive individuals, coupled with factors that create opportunities for innovation. Causality and tool use. The observation that many animal species frequently use tools has motivated researchers to examine whether animals infer the causal relationships among a tool's structure, the aspect of the environment acted upon, and the outcome of the action. An alternative that has most commonly been contrasted with this possibility is that a tool-using individual might engage in these behaviors as an outcome of some form of associative conditioning. As discussed earlier, some researchers have proposed that organisms use associative mechanisms to learn about causal relations, so in some ways, the dichotomy is false. Yet, when considering complex physical problems with tools, the question is whether the tool user goes beyond learning that a tool, manipulated in a certain manner, causes the availability of a reward to realizing why it causes the food outcome. This latter understanding would, for example, allow for detection of analogies between tasks and thus quick determination of solutions, e.g., understanding why a hammer can insert a nail may help you also to realize that it can break a window. Two main types of research approaches have been used to examine this understanding. First, trap tube tasks examine the understanding of the potential outcomes of using a tool given particular environmental features, which in turn explain something about how the tool user construes the causal relations of the situation. The second approach simply asks subjects to pick one tool among many to solve a particular task. When the tool options are systematically controlled to either possess or not possess effective physical features, researchers can examine whether these features are relevant to the subject. Both research approaches are discussed in the next two sections. Trap tube tasks. The trap tube task has been used extensively in the study of physical causal reasoning. Food is placed in a horizontal, transparent tube that has a short vertical tube, a trap, attached to it, figure 8.7. Subjects must use a stick to push or pull the food from one side or the other of the tube in a manner that avoids the hold that leads to the trap. The dependent measure is typically how long it takes until the trap is avoided consistently across trials. Follow-up tasks are then used to determine what underlying learning and decision processes led to the correct use of the stick tool. The hole and the base of the trap are two causally relevant features. The former is relevant because objects move horizontally over continuous surfaces, and the latter contains the food because of its solidity. In versions of the task in which multiple sticks were provided, the length and width of the stick are also relevant causal features. Figure 8.7, the trap tube task. A stick can be used to push food out of the tube, but to avoid the trap, it is critical to insert the stick in the correct end of the tube. Okay, so you can see it's like a horizontal tube, and in the middle at the bottom it has another little cylinder attached to it that will contain the food. So if you push the food across the little cylinder that will trap the food, then you don't get any food. But if you put the stick in at the other end, so that the stick goes across the food trap and just pushes the food out of the other horizontal end, then that's a success. In some of the first experiments using this task, capuchin monkeys and chimpanzees learned to successfully avoid the trap. They pushed the food away from the trap and out of the tube. However, in follow-up experiments in which the trap tube was inverted, and thus the trap was no longer relevant, so they just flipped the trap to the top of the trap, they continued to insert the stick as if to avoid the trap, suggesting that they were not using causal reasoning to solve the task. Instead, they may have learned through operant conditioning that certain behaviors yielded food, e.g. pushing the food away from the whole trap. Later studies using the trap tube task have pointed to some of its limitations. First, it is possible that the action itself, i.e. pushing food away from you, may pose additional inhibitory challenges above and beyond causal reasoning. Studies with chimpanzees, orangutans, and woodpecker finches suggest that this might be the case. If the tool allowed the food to be pulled out of the tube, the trap was not avoided in the follow-up inverted tube trials. Second, correct performance when the tube is inverted is simply random behavior, which can be interpreted in many ways, including fatigue or disinterest. There is also no reason to alter behavior when the trap is no longer functional. There is no cost to inserting the stick in either end of the tube. In fact, even adult humans tend to avoid the inverted trap when tested in an analogous manner. To address some of these concerns, other studies have approached the trap tube paradigm in a different manner. The method involves examining the ability to transfer performance from one task to another task that has an analogous causal structure, but non-causal stimuli are changed. If transfer between tasks occurs, subjects perform correctly very soon after being presented with the new task, and the hypothesis that animals are engaging in causal reasoning is supported because rule-based behavior or reliance on stimulus generalization is less likely, e.g. triangulation. That is, transfer implies some abstraction of the similar causal structure of the two tasks. Using this paradigm, however, has yielded mixed results. Rooks, a bird species that does not use tools in the wild, did not quickly solve a new task after reaching reliable performance on the trap tube task, except for one subject out of the 7 tested. In another study, none of the 4 ape species showed quick transfer between tasks. New Caledonian crows showed slightly better transfer, with 3 out of 6 subjects quickly solving a new task. In that study, crows were presented with a 2-trap task in which one of the traps was non-functional because it was covered with a solid surface, figure 8.8. After demonstrating consistent successful performance on the tube task, the crows were presented with a trap table task in which they had to choose one of 2 tools with which to pull in a piece of food. Pulling one tool would result in the food falling into a trap, while pulling the other tool brought the food toward the crow over a continuous surface. Thus, the visual features of the trap table task differed from the trap tube task, but the tasks were analogous in terms of the causal relations. The fact that 3 of the birds showed transfer by quickly solving the trap table task is intriguing. Yet the differences in performance across the sample of birds suggest that more research is needed. Figure 8.8, drawing of the apparatus used with New Caledonian crows. A. The two-trap task. B. The trap table task. Okay, so the two-trap task looks the same as the original trap tube task, except that there's two traps, one on either end of the tube, and then one of the traps is covered, so you can still push the food out over it. Okay, and then B is the trap table task. So it kind of looks like there are two pieces of food, and then one involves you pulling the tool over a hole where the food will fall in, or you choose the other food and you pull that with another tool where it will just pull over the surface toward you. Okay, so that is similar. Choosing the right tool. Another approach to addressing the question of what, if any, causal understanding underlies animal tool use requires subjects to pick one tool among many to solve a particular task. In experiments like this, the tool options are controlled such that they possess or do not possess physical features that allow the attainment of goals. Some have proposed that these types of tasks are less demanding than the trap tube tasks and more comparable to the actual discriminations that tool-using species must make in the wild. For example, without the trap and with various sticks to choose from, the tube task can examine whether animals recognize the relevant tool features that enable access to the food, e.g. length, width, rigidity. Wieselbergy et al. 1995 provided a baited tube along with a bundle of sticks and a stick with an inappropriate H shape to capuchin monkeys and 3 ape species, bonobos, chimpanzees, and orangutans. Each of the species ultimately took one of the sticks from the bundle to solve the task, but only the capuchin monkeys also attempted to use ineffective tools, such as trying to push the entire bundle into the tube. In a similar task, New Caledonian crows picked appropriately long sticks to obtain food from a tube and would modify sticks by removing horizontal branches to create a tool if necessary. Other studies have examined what tools animals will choose after initial training with one type of tool. After learning to use a certain cane-shaped tool to pull in an out-of-reach piece of food, tamarin monkeys, which have not been observed to use tools in the wild, reliably chose other cane-shaped tools, even if the canes differed in texture or color from the training tool. Figure 8.9. These results suggest that the tamarins recognized which feature was relevant to the task, shape, and disregarded changes to other non-causal features like color and texture. Since this study, other primate species have been tested and similar results obtained. Figure 8.9. A tamarin monkey choosing a cane with which to pull in a piece of food. Across experiments, tamarin monkeys reliably chose other cane-shaped tools, even if the canes differed in texture or color from the training tool. Conclusions. The research presented in this chapter has addressed, but not solved, the question of causal physical understanding in animals. Many researchers have proposed that the either-or framework, i.e. either associative learning or human-like inference, is not an effective way to attempt to categorize the causal cognition of other species. After all, some causal understanding may result from initial associative learning, and even when it cannot be attributed to conditioning, it may be premature to assume it is like human inference. As humans, we deliberately intervene to diagnose causal dependencies. We experiment. Of course, cognitive scientists are still working out the best way to model human causal understanding, and even causal Bayes nets appear to have their limitations. The research field now accepts that animals understand that certain features of objects are important in tool using, and when subjects show the ability to transfer knowledge from one tool-using situation to another, it would appear that some analogy has been made between the causal structure of each situation. However, there is still little documentation of this transferability, and further research is needed. In contrast, humans generalize freely from one situation to another and improvise. A textbook can be used as a doorstop or a rock as a hammer, though when a tool has conventional status in human culture, improvisation is slowed down by knowledge of its intended function, functional fixedness. Regardless of potential differences between humans and animals, one important conclusion from the present research is that many animals have evolved complex behaviors and understanding of the physical world that are far beyond our initial assumptions. Even if these abilities are determined to be the result of relatively simple cognitive processes, it would be cause for updating our understanding of the basic properties of cognition. Chapter summary. The philosopher David Hume famously argued that causality is an illusion. We cannot observe causality, but we nevertheless hold causal beliefs about connections among things. Some aspects of conditioning parallel aspects of causality, and it has been proposed that humans and animals use associative mechanisms to learn about causal relations. By this account, causal learning can be thought of as a byproduct of associative learning. However, it is not easy to explain all experimental findings with associative models. There is some evidence that rats can also understand causal relations in a manner consistent with causal Bayes net theories, Bayesian networks. This ability undermines most associationist accounts and presents a far more complex view of animal causal cognition than was previously available. Many researchers, particularly in the field of cognitive development, have considered the topic of causality to include the understanding of basic object physics. Recognition of basic aspects of object physics allows for prediction of an outcome of object interactions. Studies tapping into the understanding of object physics have a rich history in the study of infant cognitive development, and many of these paradigms have been modified for use with animals. Tool use is one of the central areas of interest within the field of comparative cognition. Researchers realized early on that the study of tool behaviors would require clear definitions of what did and did not characterize true tool use. Ecological conditions can favor tool use in some species over others. It is more likely, for example, that a species that engages in extractive foraging will be found to engage in tool use than a species that does not have to physically extract a food source from the environment. Some species will modify objects in their environment in order to manufacture tools, but the development of this behavior can take many forms. The existence of precursor behaviors has suggested to some researchers that the development of tool use in some species may start from an inherited trait or behavioral template, like in the New Caledonian crows, yet elaboration occurs through subsequent trial and error learning, social learning from others, or some combination of both. A certain degree of social tolerance may be necessary to allow for young members of a species to engage in social learning of tool use. That said, some researchers have also argued that an opportunity for innovation occurs when at least some of the individuals of a group are foraging alone or are less tolerated by others. Animals appear to recognize that certain features of objects are important in tool using, and when subjects show the ability to transfer knowledge from one tool-using situation to another, it would appear that some analogy has been made between the causal structure of each situation. However, there is still little documentation of this transferability, and further research is needed.